I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Era of Reclamation talk. I invited Bonnie Greer to curate a project, and together we identify reclamation as a prevalent theme of our era. This is also an opportunity to listen and to learn as we move towards the great transformation of the British Museum.
There's two things that happen in, I don't want to call it diaspora, I call it meta-Africa, all of us in this great circular world that is Africa, the Caribbean, the Americas, Europe, that goes around this way all the time. That there are points along that circle where we're told we have no history, or we're told that, or we're encouraged to fantasize about it, or there are things that are lost or things are taken. And so there's this continuous kind of thing that goes around. But yet it seems to me that the genius of us who are descended from those who decided to live, who survived, is that we've been able to still hold on to things anyway. We've still been able to grasp things anyway. And I think food is one of them. Just an example, like an ingredient that you found a big history on.
Sure. So sort of chilies, for example, every country in the world will have some sort of chili paste or chili sauce that they, use alongside their cookery or inside the cookery. So, and when you look at the chili itself, you can follow the trade routes. And that's what I'm very interested in as well, sort of seeing how these ingredients have traveled with people and become part of their communities, part of what they're growing and adapting to sort of different locations. I think as well, when you have like displaced people, you are latching on to some sort of sense of community. And so as an example, you have Scotch bonnets that were being brought from sort of Haiti and going to, for example, throughout the Caribbean. And I know, for example, like to New Orleans, they ended up becoming an integral part of, say, gumbos and different foods there. But I know from sort of the 16th century, 17th century, you have chilies that are literally, there's an explosion and they're going all over the world and being adapted and really put into the cookery. And you see that time and time again.
Food has been a big story in the Caribbean. I mean, most of slavery was established based on food. Initially, the issue of colonialism and slavery in the Caribbean region was based around gold and precious metals and things like that. But then it moved to food, sugar, and plant stuff like indigo. So it was always kind of agricultural. So food is a big part of the identity of the Caribbean and the evolution of the Caribbean, as well as foods that were introduced to the Caribbean from different places, like the breadfruit, Captain Bligh from Tahiti, and foods that were brought from Brazil and other regions to the Caribbean. And it was this use of things that helped to evolve this people of the Caribbean. They learned from the indigenous people the use of things like cassava and poisons and medicines and how poison could be used as a medicine to purge the body of infestations of worms and things like that.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the Haitian Revolution, for instance, which was world changing. I mean, and in many ways, Napoleon was defeated. He was defeated. Huge mark on world history. And I learned in doing my podcast in Search of Black History that some of that was down to women actually who had come from, who were captured and enslaved from a particular region in Africa who were actually warrior women. And, unfortunately, the French got the wrong people and they got to Haiti and took Napoleon, helped take Napoleon out. But also that they seemed to be immune from smallpox, that there was a possibility that in parts of Africa, parts that were beginning to come under colonialization, that there was a form of vaccination, that there was food, some of it was used as a way to fight against disease. And Ian, am I wrong in saying that you've discovered something or some information that even Hans Sloane found out?
Well, it's kind of ironic that this, the lack of take-up of vaccine amongst the African American and Black population in the UK and in the US currently. Now, in the mid-1700s, Sloane and others were in communication with people in Turkey in a place called Smyrna about a practice of inoculation at the time. And the people and they introduced it into the UK with a lady called Lady Mary Wortley Montague, I think her name was. And so the practice came through Turkey, Smyrna, but it was something that the people in Turkey learned from people in Africa. So it was a practice, inoculation, which was established in Africa. And Sloane has communication with a gentleman called Cotton Mather in, I think, in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Right, who reports that some of the enslaved people he knew in Massachusetts were also practicing inoculation during the early 1700s.
Add to that. I can add to what you're saying. I didn't even know you were going to say this, but I can add to that in fact, Cotton Mather took the credit for the vaccination, which we would now call vaccination, because there was a smallpox outbreak in Boston, Massachusetts. And he had a formula to help the folks, but of course, he took it from the folks he had enslaved, and that they didn't get the credit. And now it's starting to come to be known that actually there were Black people knew this method.
And there's a lot of these things in science, a transfer of knowledge that has happened over generations and centuries that kind of gets mixed up. You've kind of got to study the manuscripts and study the code. A lot of stuff is coded because certain things people didn't want to hear. You know, if
they didn't want to share, or
sometimes people weren't allowed the freedom to say the truth because it might contradict the people who went to university and stuff over here, because in Europe, because there was a belief that Europeans had a superior knowledge to others. And an example of this is Sloane again, and the discussion about quinine and the use of quinine in the treatment of malaria. Because malaria, the quinine had been known for a long time during the 1600s as a potential treatment for malaria, but it was shied away from because there was a belief in magic and superstition, and it was known as the Jesuit's bark, you know, this bark of a tree called the cinchona tree. And Sloane remarks in the 1690s that a poor Indian knew more about quinine and the use of quinine for malaria than all the books in all the universities in Europe. So he was speaking out against the established education system and saying, you know, a simple poor Indian knows more than all these universities about quinine.
We talked about ambiguity, and I think that's quite an interesting case, because Sloane obviously studied while he was in Jamaica. He would study the cultures and the agricultures of enslaved people, and he would in a way study them as the culture and agriculture of the indigenous people, who by then were practically gone, had fallen victim to the diseases imported by Europeans. And what you just said reminds me of of his, in his seminal work on Jamaica, he would at times say or dismiss the traditional knowledge, which is very developed knowledge, whereas at the same time, when he was suffering, he would actually make use of this and be cured by these same people because they knew better how to do it than he did as a medical doctor, as a trained European medical doctor.
Sure. There's the story of a problem he had with a chiga in his foot, which is a small insect that burrows into between your toes and stuff. And he'd never encountered such a thing. And he has an African woman treat him because she knew more about it than all the Europeans who were there. And he remarks in his account that in her country, she was a queen.
How present are all these strands of traditions that have gone into Caribbean culture or cultures that have informed Caribbean cultures?
I was thinking about that myself, and as I often do, I sometimes look through the British Museum collection and found we've got some examples in the collection from the first first documented Jamaican-born artist, Isaac Mendes Belisario. And he did many different types of paintings, but he also did a series of lithographs called Sketches of Character. And within those, you sort of really start seeing kind of Caribbean, Creole type celebrations, like captures of costume and these street parades that would have taken place as part of John Canoe. I think you've seen them up on the screen there. And the one on the left is the Band of the Jawbone, and the one on the right is Cuckoo or Actor Boy. But so yeah, these are some of the first instances of where you kind of can see the unique, uniqueness kind of coming out solely. You can see elements of African masquerade, ritual, dress, as well as sort of some European theatrical costuming. But I think these are really good examples of sort of that pinpointing that time and just how wide that can go.